Run, kid, please. I'm begging you. Run. She had one eye swollen shut, blood drying on her jaw, and a chain wrapped twice around her chest. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was asking him to leave her there to die, because staying meant he might die too. Timmy Harper was 8 years old. His sneakers were soaked through. He had half a bottle of warm water and a dead phone battery and absolutely no reason to stay. He stayed. What happened next didn't just save one woman's life. It shook 500 hardened men to their core and forced an entire town to ask who they really were. If this story moves you, subscribe right now, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this goes. Timmy Harper was 8 years old, and he already knew that the woods behind his grandmother's house kept secrets. He'd learned that the hard way, twice. Once when he found a deer that had been shot and left to die near the creek bed, its eyes still open, still soft, still confused about what the world had done to it. And once when he found a man passed out drunk against a pine trunk, snoring like thunder, an empty bottle loosely gripped in one hand. Both times, Timmy had stopped. Both times he had not run. His grandmother, Ruth Harper, called it a curse of the caring. She said it like it was both a problem and a point of pride. Some people walk past trouble, she'd told him once, pressing a warm dish towel into his hands after supper. And some people can't. You, baby, are the second kind. And that's going to cost you sometimes, but it's going to make you worth something. Timmy hadn't fully understood what she meant. He was 8. He was mostly thinking about his dog. Duke was a 3-year-old beagle mix with one white paw and the stubbornness of a man who decided he was right about everything. He'd slipped through a gap in the fence near the old shed around noon, and Timmy had been chasing him for the better part of 2 hours through the thick brush and pine corridors that stretched for nearly a mile behind the house. His sneakers were soaked through. His shirt had a new tear near the left shoulder from a low branch that caught him off guard. His grandmother had no idea he'd gone this far. That was detail number 1 that mattered. Detail number 2, Timmy had his grandmother's old prepaid phone in the side pocket of his cargo shorts. She'd given it to him the previous summer, after the deer incident, with the battery half dead and 3 program numbers: home, 911, and Mrs. Crowley next door. You go past the fence line, you take this, she'd said. I mean it. He'd taken it. He didn't always remember. Today, by luck or by something bigger than luck, he had. He'd been calling Duke's name for a solid 15 minutes, pushing through brush, ducking low branches, moving in the direction of the creek, because Duke always went to the creek when he was feeling rebellious. Timmy could hear the distant trickle of water getting louder, and then he heard something else. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was more like the sound a voice makes when it's been screaming for so long it has almost given up on screaming. It was hoarse. It was thin. But it was words. He was certain of it. He stopped walking. Hello? He called out. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath, like someone deciding whether to answer. Hello? He tried again, louder. And then, barely above the sound of the creek, help, please, help me. Timmy stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds. His brain did what brains do in that kind of moment. It ran through every scary story he'd ever heard, every warning his grandmother had given about strangers in the woods, every ghost story told at school, every news headline he'd accidentally overheard from the living room television. And then he started walking toward the voice. He would not be able to explain later why he did that. Not fully. He just knew that the sound, that voice, was real. And real things in pain were different from made-up things in the dark. He pushed through a thick cluster of low pines, branches scraping both arms, and then he was in a small clearing near the creek bank. And he saw her. She was sitting on the ground with her back against a massive oak tree. A heavy chain, the kind used to lock up motorcycles or secure trailers, was wrapped twice around her torso and around the trunk, fastened somewhere behind the bark he couldn't see. Her wrists were bound in front of her with zip ties. She was wearing jeans, black boots, and a black leather vest over a torn gray t-shirt. Her dark hair was matted and tangled. Her left eye was swollen, almost completely shut. There was dried blood along her jaw and a fresh cut above her eyebrow that was still seeping. She was looking straight at him. And her first words, the very first thing she said to him, were not what he expected. "Kid," she said, her voice barely holding itself together, "you need to leave. Right now." Timmy blinked. "Are you okay?" "No," she coughed, winced, steadied herself. "And you won't be either if you stay. I'm serious, there were two of them. They might still be close. You need to go. Now." Timmy didn't move. She stared at him. She wasn't crying, he noticed that. Her one good eye was hard and flat and exhausted, the way his grandmother's eyes got when she was past the point of asking for things, past the point of hoping out loud. "Kid," she said again, firmer, "I'm telling you to leave." "I'm not leaving," Timmy said. She let out a breath, slow, shaky, like she'd been holding it for a very long time. "How old are you?" 8. She closed her eye for a second. When she opened it, something in her face had shifted. It wasn't relief. It was more complicated than that. It was the look of someone who has been alone in pain for so long that even the wrong kind of help feels like a crack of light. "Do you have a phone?" she asked. "Yeah." "Call 911. "Okay." Timmy reached into his cargo pocket. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the cold, from the wet sneakers, from something his body was doing that his brain hadn't caught up with yet. He pulled out the phone. "My name is Timmy Harper," he said before he even dialed, like he was introducing himself properly before doing the thing that needed to be done. The woman stared at him, and for just a moment, a single tear slid down the one cheek that wasn't too swollen to feel it. "Call," she said, very quietly. "Please." He dialed. The dispatcher picked up on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency?" Timmy's voice came out steadier than anyone had a right to expect from an 8-year-old boy standing in wet sneakers next to a chained woman in the middle of the Tennessee woods. "There's a lady chained to a tree near the creek behind my grandmother's house on Hadley Road. She's bleeding. She can't get loose. I think maybe someone hurt her on purpose. You need to come fast." There was a brief pause, the kind that meant the dispatcher was doing 3 things at once. "Can you stay on the line with me, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is the woman conscious and breathing?" Timmy looked at the woman, who was watching him with her one open eye. "Yes," he said. "She's awake. She's talking." "Are there any other people nearby?" He looked around the clearing. Trees, creek, wind, nothing moving. "I don't see any." "Okay, units are being dispatched now. I need you to stay where you are and stay on the line. What's your name?" "Timmy Harper." "Good, Timmy. You did the right thing calling. Can you tell me the woman's name?" He lowered the phone slightly and looked at her. "What's your name?" She hesitated, just for a second, but it was the kind of hesitation that had weight to it. "Lily," she said finally. "Lily Cole." He put the phone back up. "Her name is Lily Cole." There was a longer pause from the dispatcher this time. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And in that silence, Timmy didn't know it yet, but the name Lily Cole had just changed the temperature of the entire situation. The dispatcher had heard it, and somewhere in the back of that 911 center, someone who'd worked Asheville and its surrounding counties for a long time was already sitting up straighter. Because in this part of Tennessee, the name Cole was not a quiet one. "Timmy," the dispatcher said carefully, "I want you to move a little away from the tree. Not far, just a few steps. And keep your eyes open, okay? Don't approach anyone you don't know." "Okay," he said. He lowered the phone just enough to look at Lily. "They're coming," he told her. She nodded. Her jaw was tight. She was breathing through her nose slowly, with the controlled concentration of someone managing a level of pain they'd had to make peace with. at least for now. How long have you been here? Timmy asked. Don't know. She shifted slightly, winced hard. Since last night, maybe. I lost track. Last night. Timmy's stomach did something he didn't have words for. He thought about being alone in the dark woods, chained to a tree, unable to move, not knowing if anyone would ever come. The thought lasted only a second before he pushed it away, because there was nothing useful in it. He pulled the water bottle from his backpack, half empty, warm from the afternoon heat, and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. You can't reach it, he said. He stepped closer, close enough that he could tilt the bottle to her lips. Here. She drank. She drank slowly at first, and then less slowly, and the sound she made in the back of her throat when the water hit was the sound of something essential being restored. When the bottle was empty, she pulled her face back and breathed. Why are you helping me? She asked. Her voice was very quiet, not suspicious, just genuinely, honestly bewildered, like the concept had become foreign to her somewhere between last night and now. Timmy thought about it for a second. He looked at her busted eye, her bound wrists, the chain cutting into the leather over her ribs. Because you need it, he said. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The creek kept going. A bird called once from somewhere in the trees and went quiet. You're going to be okay, he told her. He said it the same way his grandmother said things she meant, not as a comfort, but as a fact she'd personally decided to enforce. Lily looked at him with that one good eye, and something in it broke open, just a little. What did you say your name was? Timmy Harper. Timmy Harper, she repeated, very slowly, like she was putting it somewhere she wouldn't lose it. The first siren was still a long way off, a faint thread of sound winding through the hills, too distant to measure. But it was there. He'd heard it. She'd heard it. They're coming, he said again. I know, she said. Do you want me to stay? She looked at the trees. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. Yeah, she said, I do. So he stayed. He sat on the ground next to the oak tree, not touching the chain, not getting in the way of anything, just sitting, present. His wet sneakers soaking into the dirt, his heartbeat starting to slow down from the sprint pace it had been keeping since he heard her voice. He kept the phone at his ear. The dispatcher was still there, asking small questions, checking in, keeping the line warm. He answered her. He watched the tree line, and he watched Lily. There was something about the way she was breathing now that was different from when he'd first found her. It was still controlled, still tight, but there was a rhythm to it that hadn't been there before, like she'd been bracing herself against something for so long that the knowledge that it was almost over allowed her, just barely, to unclench. You got family? She asked him out of nowhere. My grandmother, he said, Ruth Harper. She doesn't know how far I went. Something that might have been the edge of a smile crossed Lily's face. Just the edge. She's going to be real unhappy with you. Yeah, Timmy said. He thought about it. Yeah, she is. Good grandmother? The best. Lily made a sound, almost a laugh, but caught before it could hurt her ribs. Hold on to that, she said softly. Don't take that for granted for a single day. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. She looked at him sharply. How old did you say you are? 8. 8 years old, and you just called me ma'am. She shook her head, slowly, carefully because of the eye. Where did you come from, Timmy Harper? He didn't have an answer for that, so he just shrugged. The sirens were closer now, much closer. He could hear tires on gravel somewhere beyond the trees. 2, maybe 3 vehicles moving fast. He stood up. They're here, he said. Timmy. Her voice stopped him. He looked back. Her jaw was set. Her eye was steady on him. Her wrists were still bound, the chain still wrapped twice around her ribs, the oak tree still holding her in place. But the way she looked at him in that moment had none of the resignation that had been in her face when he first found her. When this is over, she said, when everything settles, I need you to do something. What? Tell them I didn't break. Her voice didn't shake. Tell them Lily Cole didn't break. Timmy looked at her for a long moment. He didn't ask who she meant by them. He didn't need to. I'll tell them, he said, and then the sound of boots on pine needles and the crackle of a radio cut through the trees, and the first deputy pushed into the clearing with his hand on his hip and his eyes moving fast across everything. And Timmy raised his free hand and said, in a voice so steady it would be quoted back to him years later, "She's here. She's alive. I stayed with her." The deputy stopped. He looked at the woman chained to the tree. He looked at the 8-year-old boy standing next to her with an empty water bottle in his backpack and a half-dead prepaid phone pressed to his ear. "You called this in?" the deputy asked. "Yes, sir." The deputy's jaw moved once. Then he clicked his radio and said, "We've got her. She's alive. And somebody send a word to the sergeant. You are not going to believe who found her." Behind the first deputy, 2 more were pushing into the clearing. One already had bolt cutters. Another had a medical kit. They moved around Timmy with efficiency and urgency and professional calm. But Lily's eye, her one good eye, stayed on Timmy, and it held something he would spend a long time trying to name correctly. Not just gratitude, not just relief. It was the look of a woman who had spent a night in the dark, convinced that no one was coming, and had been wrong. That specific wrong. The kind that changes you. Timmy stood to the side while they worked. He watched them cut the chain. He watched Lily exhale when the pressure finally released. He watched the paramedic kneel down and start asking her questions. Her name, the date, could she feel her hands? Did she know where she was? And he watched her answer each one precisely and without hesitation. Never wavering, never collapsing. She'd said she didn't break. She hadn't been lying. One of the deputies put a hand on Timmy's shoulder. "You did good, son," he said gruffly, like the words cost him something. "You did real good." Timmy nodded. He was starting to feel the tiredness now. The long run through the woods, the fear that had been running parallel to his actions the whole time without him giving it permission to show itself. His legs felt heavy. His throat was dry. But he didn't sit down. He stayed standing until they had Lily on the stretcher, until she was wrapped in a silver emergency blanket and had an oxygen mask resting below her chin and an IV already threaded into her left arm, until she was ready to be moved. And as they lifted her, she turned her head and found him. "Timmy Harper," she said, her voice stronger now, strange and rough and full. "You remember what I asked you to tell them?" "I remember," he said. "Say it back to me." He looked her straight in the eye. Lily Cole didn't break. She held his gaze for one long, clear second. Then she let them carry her out of the woods. Timmy stood alone in the clearing next to the great oak tree. The chain lay on the ground where they dropped it. The creek kept moving. Somewhere behind him, way off through the pines, he heard Duke barking. He exhaled. He reached down, picked up his empty water bottle from the ground, and tucked it back into his backpack. Then he turned and walked out of the woods. He did not know yet that the name Lily Cole had already reached the dispatch center and been spoken into a radio frequency that carried it, within the hour, to 6 different counties and eventually to a man named Mason Cole. A man with a full beard, 200,000 miles on his motorcycle, and 500 brothers who would follow him without question to the end of the earth. He did not know yet that what he'd done in that clearing was already becoming something larger than itself. He just knew that Duke needed to be found, and that his grandmother was going to be furious, and that for some reason he couldn't explain and wouldn't try to, he felt more like himself, more sure of who he was and what he was made of than he had ever felt in his 8 years of living. He pushed through the tree line and hit the dirt road, and the afternoon light hit his face, and he called out Duke's name, and somewhere close the beagle answered. Ruth Harper was standing on the porch when Timmy came out of the tree line. She had her arms crossed and her jaw set in that specific way That meant she had already decided not to cry, had already moved past the stage where crying was available to her, and had arrived at the harder, quieter place on the other side of it. She'd heard the sirens. She'd seen the deputy's cruiser pull past her driveway. She'd called out for Timmy twice from the back fence and gotten nothing back but wind. And in the 40 minutes between that silence and the sight of him walking out of the pines with wet sneakers and a tear in his shirt, Ruth Harper had lived through approximately 4 different versions of the worst day of her life. She didn't say anything when she saw him. She just walked down the porch steps and across the yard. And when she reached him, she grabbed both his shoulders and held him at arm's length and looked at every inch of his face the way a person does when they need to confirm with their own eyes what they already know is true. "I'm okay," Timmy said. "I know you are," she said. "I can see that." She exhaled slowly through her nose. "Duke came back 20 minutes ago. He came back through the gap in the fence, muddy to his ears, completely unbothered." She paused. "Which means you went past the creek." "Yes, ma'am." "How far past?" "Pretty far." Ruth's grip on his shoulders tightened slightly. "Timmy Allen Harper." "I heard someone," he said. "I couldn't leave." She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were sharp and brown and full of something she wasn't saying yet. Then she pulled him forward and held him against her chest, and he let her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "There's a deputy sitting in our driveway," she said into the top of his head. "He wants to talk to you." "Okay." "He's been waiting politely, and I've been telling him politely that he was going to have to keep waiting until I had eyes on my grandson." She pulled back and looked at him again. "You ready?" "Yes, ma'am." She kept one hand on his shoulder all the way to the driveway. The deputy's name was Gerald Watts. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with a calm face and the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He stepped out of the cruiser when he saw them coming, and he took off his hat, which Timmy noticed without fully knowing why it mattered. "Ma'am," he said to Ruth. Then he looked at Timmy. "You Timmy Harper?" "Yes, sir." "You the one who called in the woman on Hadley Creek Road?" "Yes, sir." Deputy Watts looked at him for a moment the way the paramedic had looked at Lily, like he was running a quick check, confirming something was real that he hadn't fully believed until he saw it with his own eyes. He crouched down to Timmy's level, which men in uniform didn't always do, and Timmy respected it. "I need to ask you some questions," Watts said, "about what you saw, about what you heard, about whether anyone else was in those woods when you were there. Is that okay?" "Yes, sir." "Good man." He looked up at Ruth. "Ma'am, is there somewhere we can sit?" They sat on the porch. Ruth brought out sweet tea without being asked, set it on the rail, and stood with her arms folded in a way that made clear she wasn't going anywhere. Watts didn't object. He pulled out a small notepad and a pen, and he asked Timmy to walk him through everything, from the moment he heard Lily's voice to the moment the first deputy pushed into the clearing. Timmy told it cleanly and in order. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't leave things out. When he got to the part about Lily telling him to run, Watts's pen stopped moving for just a second. "She told you to leave?" Watts asked. "Yes, sir, twice." "And you didn't?" "No, sir." Watts made a note. "Did she say anything about who put her there? Did she give any names?" Timmy thought carefully. "No, she just said there were 2 of them, and they might still be close." "Did you see anyone else? Any vehicles? Any sounds from the road? Anything?" "No, sir, just the creek. And birds." Watts nodded slowly. He wrote something else. Then he looked up. "Son," he said, and the word landed with a weight that was different from the way adults usually said it to kids. Not dismissive, not generic, actual. "Do you know who Lily Cole is?" Timmy shook his head. Watts glanced up at Ruth for a half second, then back to the boy. "Her husband is a man named Mason Cole. He's the chapter president of a motorcycle club that operates across most of this region." He paused. "Do you understand what I mean by motorcycle club?" Like Hell's Angels, Timmy said. Watts didn't flinch. Something like that, yes. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because when news of this gets out, and it will get out fast, these things always do, there are going to be a lot of people paying attention to what happened today, to where it happened, and to who found her. He let that settle. I want to make sure you and your grandmother understand that. Ruth spoke from behind him, her voice level. Are we in any danger, Deputy? I don't believe so, Watts said carefully. The people who did this to Mrs. Cole, that's a separate matter, and we're working it. But the people who are going to respond to it, Mason Cole's people, I want to be straight with you. They're going to want to know everything. And one of the things they're going to want to know is your grandson's name. The porch went quiet for a moment. And what do we do when they come asking? Ruth said. Watts looked at her steadily. That's your call to make, ma'am. I can't tell you what to say to civilians. What I can tell you is that from what I've seen today, your grandson didn't do anything wrong. He did something most grown men wouldn't have done. He looked back at Timmy. You probably saved her life. You know that? Timmy didn't answer right away. He thought about Lily's face in the dark of the creek, the way she'd looked when she first saw him, that absolute disbelief, that one good eye wide and empty of hope. He thought about the specific sound she'd made when the water hit. She was there since last night, Timmy said. We know, Watts said quietly. She was reported missing around 11 p.m. We've been looking. She said she didn't break. Timmy looked up at the deputy. She said to tell people that. Something moved across Gerald Watts's face, quick and controlled, the way emotions moved across the faces of men who trained themselves not to let them run loose. He wrote something in the notepad. He pressed his lips together briefly. I'll pass that along, he said. He finished his questions, left his card with Ruth, told them he'd be in touch, and pulled slowly out of the driveway. Timmy watched the cruiser until it turned the corner and disappeared. Then Ruth sat down in the chair next to him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. How are you? She asked. Tired, he said, and my sneakers are soaked. I know. Take them off. I'll stuff them with newspaper. He pulled his sneakers off. Duke padded over from the corner of the porch and sniffed them with the deep professional interest of a dog who finds all wet things personally compelling. Timmy scratched him behind the ear. Grammy, he said. What's going to happen now? Ruth took a long, slow sip of her tea. She looked out at the yard. She was a woman who had lived 63 years in this county, raised 2 children, buried a husband, and learned the hard way that the honest answer was almost always better than the comfortable one. I don't know, she said, but I think you rattled something today, baby. Something bigger than you know. She was right. She just didn't know yet how right she was. 40 miles away, in a converted garage on the outside of Maryville, a phone rang. The man who answered it was sitting at a metal work table with a half-disassembled carburetor in front of him and grease up to both elbows. He was 44 years old, 6'2", built like someone who had spent the better part of 2 decades doing physical work and not particularly caring if it was comfortable. His name was Mason Cole, and when he heard his vice president's voice on the other end of the line, he went completely still. We found her, the voice said. Mason didn't speak for 3 full seconds. His hands resting on the table curled very slowly into fists. Where? Hadley Creek, off the Asheville County Road. She was chained to a tree, Mace. They chained her to a tree and left her. The sound Mason Cole made was not a word. It was a low, tight sound from deep in the chest. The sound of something crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. How bad, he said. She's alive. She's in County General right now. Eyes swollen shut, some broken ribs, cuts. She's conscious and she's talking. A pause. She's asking for you. Mason was already standing. The carburetor hit the floor. Who found her? That's... Another pause, and this one had something strange in it. Careful, like the speaker was still working out how to say the next part. An 8-year-old kid, boy from Asheville, was out looking for his dog, heard her calling, called 911 and sat with her until deputies arrived. They said he didn't leave her side. Silence. 8 years old, Mason said flatly. 8 years old. Another silence, longer this time. What's his name? Mason asked. Timmy Harper. Ruth Harper's grandson. She's got a place on Hadley Road. Mason Cole stood in the middle of his garage with grease on his hands and a broken carburetor at his feet, and he did something that the men who knew him best would later say they had never once seen him do in 15 years of riding together. His eyes filled. He didn't let it go further than that. He blinked once, hard, and it was gone. But it had been there, and the man on the phone, who knew Mason Cole about as well as a person could know another person, caught it in the quality of the silence. Mace, he said carefully, what do you need? Get everyone, Mason said. Every chapter, every brother who can ride. I want them staged and ready. His voice was very quiet now, and quiet was always worse than loud with Mason Cole. And somebody find me the address for a family named Harper on Hadley Road. What for? Because an 8-year-old boy sat in the dark with my wife and held her hand until the law came, Mason said. And I am going to look him in the eye and say thank you, and then we're going to handle the rest. The call ended. Mason Cole washed the grease off his hands at the utility sink. He did it slowly, methodically, working the soap into every knuckle, the way a man does when he needs his hands to be clean before he does what comes next. His phone started buzzing again almost immediately. His sergeant-at-arms, his road captain, 2 other chapter presidents. Word had moved the way it always moved in their world. Fast and total, like a current running through wire. By the time he walked out of the garage and climbed onto his bike, he already had 19 confirmations. By midnight, he had over 200. At County General Hospital, Lily Cole was propped up in a bed in the trauma wing with a bandage over her left eye, an IV in her arm, and 3 broken ribs taped and braced. The attending physician had told her she was lucky nothing had punctured. She'd told him she knew. A female deputy was posted outside her door, not because they thought she was a suspect, but because Gerald Watts had called ahead and said the situation was complicated and the hospital should be aware. The nurse who came in at 7 o'clock to check vitals was a young woman named Angela, and when she saw who was in the bed, she did a careful job of not reacting to any of it. The bruising, the vest folded on the chair, the name on the chart. "Can I get you anything?" Angela asked. "Water? Are you hungry?" "Water," Lily said. Angela poured it, handed it over, watched Lily's hands, still slightly unsteady, close around the cup. "Someone's coming for you?" Angela asked gently. "Yes," Lily said. "My husband." "Good." Lily drank, set the cup down, stared at the ceiling tile for a moment. "There was a kid," she said suddenly. Angela paused in her charting. "Ma'am?" "In the woods. A little boy found me." Lily's voice was flat and factual, the tone of someone reporting a thing they have not yet fully processed. "He was out looking for his dog. He heard me and he came. He called for help and then he just sat with me, on the ground, like it was nothing." She paused, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Angela didn't say anything. She sensed, correctly, that this wasn't a conversation. It was Lily working something out in real time. "I told him to run," Lily said, "twice, and he said no." "How old was he?" 8. Angela set down her clipboard. "He asked me if I wanted him to stay," Lily said, "and I said yes." She looked at the ceiling. "I haven't asked anyone for anything in about 12 years, and I asked an 8-year-old boy to stay." She let out a long breath. "And he did." Angela picked her clipboard back up. She wrote something. Then she looked up. "What was his name?" "Timmy Harper," Lily said, and the name came out differently than everything else she'd said, softer, with something carefully held inside it. "Remember that name," she added. That kid is going to matter. She didn't mean it as a prediction. She meant it as a fact she had already confirmed with her own experience. Angela nodded and left quietly. Lily stared at the ceiling and waited for Mason. He arrived at 9:17 p.m. She heard the motorcycles before she heard his footsteps. A low rumble in the parking lot that the hospital staff would later describe as sounding like a coming storm. She heard the nurses talking in low voices at the station. She heard the deputy outside her door stand up straighter and clear his throat. And then the door opened and Mason Cole filled the frame of it. And for the first time since she'd heard Timmy Harper's voice in those woods, Lily felt the last wall come down. She didn't cry loudly. She wasn't built for that. But her face crumpled, just once, very briefly, the way a thing does when the pressure that has been holding it together is finally allowed to release. Mason crossed the room in 4 steps and sat on the edge of the bed and put both arms around her, carefully, reading the ribs, and pressed his face into her hair and said nothing at all for a long time. She gripped his jacket with both hands. "I knew you were coming," she said. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I kept telling myself, I knew." "I know," he said. "I know you did." They stayed like that for a while. Outside, the nurses pretended to be busy. The deputy stared at the hallway wall. Then Mason pulled back, just enough to look at her face, to look at the eye, the cut, the bruise along her jaw, and every muscle in his face went very tight. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. She told him. She told him about the black vipers. She told him about the chain. She told him about the night, the cold, the dark, the absolute silence of a woods in the middle of the night when you cannot move and you cannot know if anyone is going to come. She told it without flinching because that was how she was, and Mason listened without interrupting because that was how he was. And then she got to the part about the small sound of someone pushing through pine brush and a voice calling, "Hello." Mason's jaw moved. "He offered me his water," Lily said. "He had about half a bottle left, and he just held it up and tilted it to my lips. Like it was the most obvious thing to do." She paused. "And when I asked him why he was helping me, he said..." She stopped. She looked at Mason. "He said, because you need it. That's all. 8 years old. Because you need it." Mason Cole sat with that for a long moment. "I want to meet him," he said. "I know. I want to look him in the eye." "I know, Mason." He stood up. He was quiet for another moment. Then he turned and looked out the window at the parking lot where his brothers were waiting. Engine after engine, row after row, the low idle of 200 motorcycles in the dark. "Those boys out there," he said. "Some of them rode 4 hours when they heard." "I know," Lily said. "Not one of them asked why. Not one of them asked for details." He paused. "They just came." "That's what you do," she said. "That's what you do," he agreed. He turned back to her. "But a kid named Timmy Harper did it first, and he did it alone, and he did it without knowing any of it mattered." He looked at her steadily. "That," Mason Cole said, "is something different." He kissed her forehead. He told her he'd be back before morning. He told the deputy outside the door that if anyone so much as walked past that room wrong, he would personally make it a memorable evening for them. The deputy nodded once and said, "Yes, sir," which was not something he would typically say to a man in a leather vest. But somehow, tonight, it came out without irony. Mason walked back down the hallway, back through the lobby, back out into the parking lot, and 200 men looked up when he came through the doors. He stopped at the top of the steps. He looked out at all of them. "She's alive," he said. Just that, 2 words. And the sound that went through the parking lot, not a cheer, not a shout, something lower and more fundamental than either of those, moved through 200 chests like a single breath. Then Mason said, "In the morning, we ride to Asheville. And first, before anything else, we find a boy named Timmy Harper." Nobody asked why. Nobody asked for details. They just nodded. And somewhere across town, In a small house on Hadley Road, Timmy Harper was asleep on the couch with Duke pressed against his legs and his grandmother's hand resting briefly on his head before she turned off the lamp. And he had no idea, not a single idea, what was already rolling toward him through the dark. Timmy woke up to the sound of his grandmother's voice, which was unusual because Ruth Harper was not a woman who woke people up with her voice. She woke people up with the smell of coffee and the sound of a cast iron skillet. And if you weren't at the table by the time the biscuits came out, that was a personal decision you'd made, and you'd have to live with it. But this morning, her voice came first, and it was low and tight in a way that pulled him out of sleep, like a hand grabbing the back of his collar. "Timmy, get up. Come here." He sat up. Duke lifted his head from the other end of the couch, ears forward, reading the room. Timmy padded in his socks to the front window, where his grandmother was standing with her arms crossed and the curtain pulled back just enough to see the road. He looked out. There were motorcycles. Not one or two, not a small group passing through. There were motorcycles parked along both sides of Hadley Road as far as he could see in either direction. Big, heavy machines, chrome catching the early morning light. Riders in leather standing in clusters or leaning against their bikes with the particular stillness of men who are waiting deliberately. Not impatiently, deliberately. Like they had decided to be still and were executing that decision. Timmy counted to 12 before he stopped counting. "How many?" he asked. "A lot," Ruth said. Her jaw was set. "Deputy Watts called 20 minutes ago, said to expect them, said to stay calm. Are they here for me?" Ruth looked down at him. She held his gaze for a moment before she answered. "Yes," she said. Timmy looked back out at the road. He thought about what Deputy Watts had said on the porch the evening before, about Mason Cole's people wanting to know his name. He thought about the chain on the ground. He thought about Lily's one good eye in the clearing. He didn't feel afraid. He wasn't sure what he felt. It was something closer to the feeling before a thunderstorm. That charged, pressurized anticipation where something enormous is about to happen, and the air itself seems to know it before the people do. "What do I do?" he asked. "You get dressed," Ruth said, "and then you stand up straight." He got dressed. When he came back to the living room, Ruth had her good house dress on and her hair pinned back, and she was standing at the front door with a look on her face that said she had made her peace with whatever was coming and was simply waiting for it to arrive. A knock came 3 minutes later. Ruth opened the door. The man standing on the porch was Mason Cole, and even if Timmy hadn't known who he was, he would have known this was a man who carried weight. Not just physically, though that too, but the kind of weight that moves with a person in the way they hold themselves, and the way they look at you, and the deliberate, complete way they take up the space they occupy. Mason Cole was not in a hurry. That was the first thing Timmy noticed. Everything about the way he stood said he had nowhere else he needed to be, and nothing else he needed to do except this exact thing, right now. He looked at Ruth first. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Mason Cole. I believe you know why I'm here." Ruth held his gaze without blinking. "I do," she said. "I mean no disruption to your home," he said. "I want 2 minutes with your grandson. That's all I'm asking for. You have my word, that's all I'm here for this morning." Ruth looked at him for a long moment, long enough to make clear that his word was being evaluated and that she had a functioning system for doing that. Then she stepped aside. Mason Cole came into the house. He filled the small living room the way large men do in small spaces, but he moved carefully, with the self-awareness of someone who knows the impression they make and makes a deliberate choice to minimize the threat of it. He looked at the couch, the side table with the lamp, the needlepoint on the wall. He looked at Duke, who looked back at him with intelligent, assessing eyes. Then he looked at Timmy. He crouched down, same as Deputy Watts had done. And in that gesture, that deliberate choice to come down to a child's level, rather than stand above him, something shifted in the room. Mason Cole's eyes were dark and direct, and there was something in them that was still raw from the night before, in a way he hadn't fully smoothed over yet. He looked at Timmy the way you look at something that has turned out to be more real than you were prepared for. "You're Timmy Harper," he said. "Yes, sir. I'm Mason Cole. Lily is my wife." "I know," Timmy said. "How is she?" Timmy asked. He'd asked it before he could stop himself, and the question came out clean and direct, and Mason Cole blinked once, very slowly, like the words had landed somewhere specific. "She's going to be okay," Mason said. "She's got broken ribs and a bad eye, and she's going to be sore for a while." He paused. "But she's going to be okay. Because of you." Timmy shook his head slightly. "I just called 911. "You did more than that," Mason said. "She told me. All of it." He held Timmy's gaze. "She said you sat on the ground next to her and stayed. She said you gave her your water. She said when she told you to run, you said no." Timmy didn't answer. "Why didn't you run?" Mason asked. He wasn't challenging him, he was genuinely asking, like the answer was something he needed, personally. Timmy thought about it honestly, the way he always did when he was asked something real. "Because she needed someone to stay," he said, "and I was there." Mason Cole was quiet for a moment, then he nodded once. A slow, deep nod, the kind that means something has been confirmed that the person already suspected but needed to hear said out loud. "She also told me," Mason said carefully, "that she asked you to pass along a message." "Yes, sir." "And did you?" "I told the deputy," Timmy said. "Lily Cole didn't break." The muscle in Mason's jaw moved. He looked down at the floor for exactly 1 second, then back up. "That's right," he said. "She didn't." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of leather, small, deliberate, clearly prepared ahead of time. He unfolded it on his knee so Timmy could see it. It was a patch, black background, white lettering, and in the center, a design Timmy couldn't fully read from his angle. "In our world," Mason said, "a patch means something. It means you're recognized. It means you belong somewhere, and that somewhere claims you back." He held it out. "This one says, 'Courage before fear.' I had it made last night after Lily told me what you did." Timmy looked at it, then at Mason. "I'm 8, he said. Something moved across Mason Cole's face, quick and honest, like the edge of a laugh that had caught him off guard. "I know," he said. "You're the youngest person who's ever held one of these. That's the point." Timmy took it. It was heavier than it looked. The leather was thick and the stitching was tight and precise, and the letters were very clear. Courage before fear. He turned it over in his hands. "Thank you," he said. "No," Mason said. He stood up, looked at Ruth, who had been standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching all of it with an expression that was controlled and careful and only barely concealing the thing underneath it. "Thank you, ma'am, for raising someone like this. That doesn't happen by accident." Ruth pressed her lips together once. Then she said, "Would you like coffee, Mr. Cole?" It was the most Ruth Harper thing she could have possibly said in that moment, and Mason Cole looked at her and said, "Yes, ma'am, I would." And that was how the president of a 500-rider motorcycle brotherhood ended up sitting at a kitchen table in Asheville, Tennessee, with his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that said "World's Best Grammy" on the side. They talked for 20 minutes. Timmy sat across from Mason and listened to the two adults speak. About the town, about what the road ahead looked like, about the Black Vipers, and what would and wouldn't be said publicly about that situation. Ruth asked direct questions, and Mason answered them directly. And at no point did either of them talk around the things that needed to be said. Then Mason's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Something in his face shifted. "I need to step out for a minute," he said. He walked out to the porch. Through the window, Timmy could see him on the phone, his back slightly turned, his free hand pressed flat against the porch rail. His posture had changed. The openness of the kitchen conversation was gone, replaced by something tighter, faster, operational. Ruth refilled Timmy's juice without being asked. She watched the window. "Grammy," Timmy said quietly. Something just happened." "Yes," she said, "I see that." Mason came back through the door 60 seconds later. He looked at Ruth first, which Timmy now understood was the way Mason Cole operated. He addressed the person in charge of the room, and he'd correctly identified who that was. "There's a situation," Mason said. "I'm not going to lie to you about that. Some of the Black Vipers were spotted on Route 9 about an hour ago, moving toward this county. We don't know their intent." He paused. "But I have people in position, and I want you to know that nothing is coming near this house or this family." Ruth set down the coffee pot very carefully. "Are we in danger?" she asked. "Not if I have anything to do with it," Mason said. "And I have quite a bit to do with it." There was a silence that had several layers to it. "Timmy," Ruth said without taking her eyes off Mason, "go get your shoes on." "Grammy." "Shoes, Timmy." He went. He could hear them talking in low voices while he was in the hallway, not arguing, not alarmed, but the tight, efficient communication of two adults negotiating something serious in a short amount of time. When he came back with his shoes on, Mason was already moving toward the door. "I'm going to leave 2 men on your road," Mason told Ruth. "They'll be visible, but they won't bother you. If anything changes, you call Deputy Watts and you call this number." He held out a card, plain white, just a phone number in black ink, no name. "That's my direct line. You call it any time, day or night." Ruth took the card. "Mr. Cole," she said. He stopped. "My grandson didn't do what he did yesterday for recognition or reward," she said. "He did it because it was right. And I need you to understand that what you do next, how you handle what's coming, that's going to be the thing that tells me whether he did the right thing, giving that to a man like you." The room was very still. Mason Cole looked at Ruth Harper for a long moment. He looked at her the way he'd looked at Timmy, like something was being confirmed that he'd suspected but needed to hear. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I understand." He left. Through the window, Timmy watched him walk back to the road, watched the men around him straighten up and close in, the quick, low exchange of words, the way they moved. Not chaotic, not aggressive, but organized in the way of people who have done this before and know exactly what each of them is supposed to do. Within 2 minutes, 3 groups had broken off in different directions, moving with purpose. 2 men remained on Hadley Road. They parked their bikes at the edge of the property and stood beside them, arms loose, watching the road. Not threatening, just present. "Grammy," Timmy said, "are you scared?" Ruth sat back down at the kitchen table. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. She looked at the mug for a moment, then at her grandson. "I'm something," she said. "I'm not sure scared is the exact word." "What word is it?" She thought about it genuinely, the way she always did with him when he asked something real. "Accountable," she said finally. "I feel accountable, like something big is in motion, and we're part of it now, whether we signed up for it or not." She looked at him steadily. "And the only thing we can do is make sure our part was good." Timmy looked at the patch in his hands. He'd been holding it since Mason left, turning it over the way he'd turned over the water bottle in the woods, with the unconscious focus of someone whose hands need to be doing something while their mind works. "Was it?" he asked. "Our part?" "Yes," Ruth said without hesitation. "It was." The morning moved. Deputy Watts called at 9:30 to check in, calm, professional, telling Ruth the situation on Route 9 was being monitored, asking her to stay inside for a few hours. She said fine. She made lunch early and put a movie on the television, and Timmy sat on the couch with Duke and tried to watch it, but mostly he was listening to the low, distant rumble of motorcycle engines moving through the county roads like weather. At 11:17, 3 things happened within minutes of each other. First, Deputy Watts's cruiser came down Hadley Road fast and pulled into the driveway. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, and he went straight to the two men at the edge of the property and said something to them quickly, and they both immediately got on their phones. Second, Timmy's phone, his grandmother's prepaid phone, still in his cargo shorts from yesterday, buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. It was 4 words. He read it twice. "He is coming. Tell Mason." Third, from somewhere on the far side of the county road, a single gunshot. Ruth was in the kitchen when the shot cracked through the air. She came through the doorway in 2 seconds flat, her face white but her eyes absolutely clear. "Down," she said. "Timmy, down, now." He was already off the couch and on the floor, Duke pressed against his side before she finished the sentence. Ruth crossed the room and dropped beside him and pulled him close, one arm around his shoulders, her back against the couch, and her eyes went to the front window. Outside controlled chaos. The 2 men at the road were on the move, not running, moving fast in a trained way that Timmy could feel was different from panic. Watts was behind his cruiser with his radio up. From somewhere down the road came the rising sound of engines, not the calm idle of this morning, but the hard, urgent rev of machines being pushed. "Grammy," Timmy said. His voice was very steady, which surprised him. "I got a text." She looked at him. "What?" He held up the phone. She read it. Her face changed. "Mason's number," she said. "Give me Mason's number." He reached into his pocket. The patch was still there, and with it the plain white card. She took it, dialed, and it rang once before he picked up. "This is Ruth Harper," she said, her voice clear and measured. "My grandson just received a text from an unknown number. It says, 'He is coming. Tell Mason.' I don't know who sent it or what it means, but I thought you should know right now." A pause on the other end, short. "Read me the number it came from," Mason said. She read it. Another pause, longer. And in that pause, something happened to the quality of the sound on Mason's end. A background shift, voices getting louder, an engine sound changing pitch. "Mrs. Harper," Mason said, and his voice had gone to the very controlled, very careful register that Timmy now recognized meant something serious was being managed. "I need you and Timmy to stay away from the windows and stay on the floor until I or Deputy Watts tells you it's clear. Do you understand?" "I understand," Ruth said. "It will be resolved quickly." The call ended. Timmy and Ruth sat on the floor behind the couch with Duke between them, and from outside came sounds. Engines, voices, the static of radios, one more distant sound that might have been a second shot or might have been something else. And they waited. Ruth held Timmy's hand, and he let her, because the hand-holding was as much for her as for him, and they both knew it, and that knowing made it right. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. That was how long it lasted. Then silence. A clean, sudden silence that had a different quality from the silence before. Not the held breath of anticipation, but the exhale after. The sound of something resolved. Deputy Watts knocked on the door 90 seconds later. "All clear," he said when Ruth opened it, with Timmy at her elbow and Duke pushing past both of them. "It's over. Nobody hurt on this end. The 2 individuals involved are in custody." He looked at Timmy. "You're safe, son." Timmy exhaled. He hadn't noticed he'd been holding it. "The text," Ruth said. "The message Timmy received." Watts nodded. "We're working that. Might have been a warning from inside their own group. Someone who wanted it stopped before it went further." He paused. "Might have been someone who knew what this boy did in those woods and didn't want to see that come to harm." Timmy thought about that. Someone inside the Black Vipers, whoever they were, whoever had been on the other end of that chain, had sent a warning. To protect him. An 8-year-old boy who'd done nothing except call 911 and stay on the ground. He didn't fully understand it, but he tucked it away. He was getting better at tucking things away to understand later. By early afternoon, word had moved through Asheville the way words move in small towns. Fast and imperfect, and in every direction at once. By 2 o'clock, people were at their windows. By 3, a handful of them had walked down to the fairgrounds at the edge of town, where Mason Cole had directed his riders to gather, and they stood at a cautious distance and watched. By 4, the cautious distance had gotten smaller. Someone brought water. Someone else brought a box of sandwiches from the diner on Main Street, and a woman named Carol Briggs, who had lived in Asheville for 61 years and was not afraid of anyone, walked right up to the nearest rider and handed him a wrapped sandwich and said, "You came a long way. Eat something." The rider looked at her. He took the sandwich. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, and Carol Briggs walked back to her car, feeling like she had done exactly the right thing, which she had. Timmy didn't know about Carol Briggs yet. He was still at home, sitting on the porch steps with Duke, turning the patch over in his hands and watching the road where everything had been loud and urgent a few hours ago and was now quiet again. Mason Cole's black motorcycle came down Hadley Road at 4:45. He pulled up to the house alone, cut the engine, and walked up to the porch. He looked at Timmy, at the patch in his hands. "You heard what happened today," Mason said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Mason sat down on the step beside him. Just sat down, right there, on Ruth Harper's porch steps, next to an 8-year-old boy, and looked out at the road. "The message you got," he said. "We traced the number. You want to know who sent it?" Timmy looked at him. "Someone who used to ride with the Black Vipers," Mason said. "A man who's been looking for a reason to walk away from them for a long time." He paused. "He saw what they did to Lily. He heard what you did in those woods, and he decided that an 8-year-old boy who wouldn't run was worth more than his place in a gang that chains women to trees." Timmy sat with that. "He's out now?" Timmy asked. "He's out," Mason said. "Yeah." A long pause. "Did you know," Mason said slowly, "that when my guys heard about you this morning, before I came to your house, before any of us had met you, there wasn't a single one of them who thought what you did was strange?" He looked at Timmy. "You know what they said?" Timmy shook his head. "They said, 'Of course he stayed. That's what you do.'" Mason's voice was low. 300 men who've spent their whole lives being told they're dangerous, being told they're the ones people should run from. And when they heard about a kid who didn't run, not one of them thought it was unusual. Because in here, he pressed a fist briefly to the center of his chest. In here, they knew. That's the thing you do. That's the only thing worth doing. Timmy looked out at the road. "My grandmother said that too," he said. "She says some people walk past trouble and some people can't." Mason was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother is a wise woman," he said. "She is," Timmy agreed. Mason stood. He looked down at the boy on the steps one more time. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're going to do something in this town, all of us, together. I want you to be there." "What are you going to do?" Timmy asked. Mason Cole looked at the road. He looked at the town around the bend of it, the church steeple just visible, the water tower in the distance, the small, specific, particular shape of a place that had been afraid of people like him for a very long time. "Something they won't expect," he said. He walked back to his bike. He started it. He looked back once at Timmy, and Timmy held up the patch slightly, not showing it off, just acknowledging it, and Mason gave one single nod. Then he rode back down Hadley Road, and the sound of the engine faded into the late afternoon, and Timmy Harper sat on his grandmother's porch with a leather patch in his hands and a beagle at his feet. And somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where 8-year-old boys store the things they don't yet have words for, something had permanently changed. He didn't know the word for it yet, but Ruth Harper, watching from behind the screen door, did. She'd seen it happen to a person only a few times in her 63 years. And every time she'd seen it, it had looked exactly like this. A person sitting very still on the outside, while something enormous settled into place on the inside. Something that would hold them up for the rest of their life. She let the screen door rest quietly against the frame. She went back to the kitchen. She started on supper. The next morning came in quietly, the way mornings do after days that have been too loud. Timmy was up before his grandmother, which was unusual enough that Duke looked at him sideways from the couch, like he'd done something wrong just by being awake. He sat at the kitchen table with the patch in front of him and the prepaid phone beside it, and his untouched glass of orange juice slowly warming up. And he thought about what Mason had said on the porch steps. Something they won't expect. He turned the phrase over the same way he'd been turning the patch, looking at it from different angles, trying to find the shape of what it meant. He was still turning it over when Ruth came through the kitchen doorway in her robe, stopped when she saw him sitting there, and said nothing for a moment. "How long have you been up?" she asked. "A while." She sat down across from him. She looked at the patch. She looked at the phone. She looked at her grandson, who had a particular kind of quiet about him this morning that she recognized from her own reflection on certain mornings. The quiet of someone who has been carrying something through the night and has come to the other side of it, not lighter, but more settled. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some," he said. "You want eggs?" "Yes, ma'am." She got up and started the skillet. Neither of them said anything for a while. The sound of the cast iron and the smell of butter and the early light through the window did their work, the way familiar things do when everything else has been unfamiliar. And slowly the kitchen became what it always was, the one room in the world that kept its shape no matter what happened outside of it. "Grammy," Timmy said while she cracked eggs, "what do you think Mason meant about doing something the town won't expect?" Ruth turned the heat down slightly. She was quiet for a moment with the spatula in her hand. "I think," she said carefully, "that a man who has spent his whole life being feared has decided to try something different. And I think he means to use this town as the place where he tries it." She paused. "And I think he means to use you as the reason." Timmy thought about that. "Is that okay? That he uses me as the reason?" Ruth turned around and looked at him directly. "That depends entirely on what he does with it," she said, "and on whether what he does is true." She held his gaze. "You understand the difference between someone doing a good thing because it's good and someone doing a good thing because it benefits them?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you understand that sometimes both can be true at the same time, and that doesn't necessarily make it wrong?" He thought about it. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said, and turned back to the eggs. By 9 o'clock, the fairgrounds at the edge of Asheville were active in a way they hadn't been since the county fair 3 summers ago. Mason had gotten there before most of the town was awake, and by the time people started arriving, cautiously, on foot, from the sidewalks in the nearby streets, there were already riders working, not standing around, not posturing, working. 6 men with tools and lumber were fixing the collapsed section of the playground fence that the Parks Department had been meaning to address for 2 years and hadn't gotten around to. 4 others had backed a truck up to the small community building beside the fairgrounds and were unloading paint. The exterior of the building had been peeling since before anyone could remember. 2 men with chainsaws were dealing with the dead oak that had fallen across the walking path in the spring and become such a fixture of the landscape that most people had simply started walking around it. The town watched. Not from a distance this time. They watched from about 15 feet away, which in Asheville terms was practically standing next to someone. Carol Briggs was there again, because Carol Briggs was always where things were happening. She stood with her hands on her hips and watched a man named Reese, tall, tattooed from wrist to collar, with a beard that came to his chest, carefully measure and cut the replacement section of fence with the concentrated precision of a man who takes woodwork seriously. "You do this kind of thing often?" Carol asked him. Reese looked up. "Not often enough," he said. Carol considered that. "You want coffee? I've got a thermos." "Yes, ma'am, I would very much like that." That was the second time in 2 days that a rider had said, "Yes, ma'am," to Carol Briggs, and she went home and got 2 thermoses. Timmy and Ruth arrived at the fairgrounds at 10:30. Ruth had put on her good walking shoes and brought a covered dish. peach cobbler, because Ruth Harper did not show up anywhere empty-handed, and she carried it with the composure of a woman bringing a side dish to a church potluck, which told Timmy more about how she decided to handle this than anything she could have said. Mason was standing near the community building when he saw them. He came over, and beside him was someone Timmy hadn't expected to see. Lily Cole was standing on her own, which Timmy knew from the doctor's report he'd overheard Ruth discussing with Deputy Watts, meant she had discharged herself at least a day earlier than recommended. She had a bandage over her left eye, and her arm was against her ribs in the careful way of someone managing pain with discipline. And she was wearing her jacket and her boots and her vest, clean, pressed, back in her colors, like a declaration. She looked at Timmy, and Timmy looked at her. It was different from the clearing. Obviously it was different. No chain, no blood still moving, no creak in the background, no emergency pressing in on all sides. But the recognition between them was instant and total, the way it is between two people who have shared something that existed outside the normal rules of how people come to know each other. Lily crouched down, carefully because of the ribs, and she looked at him with both eyes, the left one still visibly damaged, still swollen at the corners, but open. And it held everything her voice had held in the clearing, plus something new. Something that had had a night and a day and another night to become more fully itself. "Hey, Timmy," she said. "Hi," he said, and then, "You got out of the hospital early." A sound came out of Lily that was somewhere between a wince and a laugh. "Yes, I did," she said. "Did the doctor say it was okay?" "The doctor said I needed rest." "That's not yes." Mason, standing behind her, made a sound that was definitively a laugh, quickly controlled. Lily looked at Timmy with her damaged eye and her steady one, and something in her face was absolutely unguarded in a way that it probably rarely was, if ever. "You're right," she said. "That's not yes." She reached out and put her hand briefly on his shoulder, light, careful, intentional. "I needed to be here. I needed to be standing on my own feet in this town, in front of these people, and not lying in a hospital bed." She paused. "Can you understand that?" Timmy thought about it genuinely. "Because if you stayed in the hospital," he said slowly, "it would feel like they won." Lily's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. "Yeah," she said quietly, "exactly like that." She stood up. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, folded in a piece of paper. She held it out to him. He took it, unfolded the paper. Inside was a photograph, a Polaroid, slightly worn at the edges. It was a picture of the oak tree at Hadley Creek, taken in the morning light from what must have been right after the deputies cleared the scene. The chain was still on the ground. The bark was marked where it had been. And leaning against the base of the tree, propped carefully, was an empty water bottle. He looked up at her. "I went back this morning," she said. "Before we came here, I needed to see it in the daylight." She held his gaze. "I needed to stand there and look at it and know it was over. And when I was leaving, I saw the water bottle still on the ground, and I picked it up and I thought about putting it in my pocket." She nodded toward the photograph. "Then I thought a picture was better, something that lasts." Timmy looked at the photograph again. He looked at the empty water bottle against the root of the tree, half empty when he'd offered it, now emptied all the way and left behind in the dirt, like evidence of the thing that had happened. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said back. And the way she said it put the words in a completely different place from the casual, the routine, the socially required. She meant them the way people mean words when they've been tested against something real and come out the other side still true. The morning moved. The town moved. And something shifted in Asheville that day in the way that real shifts happen. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but in the accumulation of small moments that each mean something and together mean something larger. The man named Reese finished the fence, and a 9-year-old girl from the neighborhood immediately went and tested the gate 3 times to make sure it swung right. It did. She looked at Reese and gave him a thumbs up. He gave one back. The community building got its first coat of paint before noon, a clean, true white that made the whole structure look like it had been built recently instead of 20 years ago and ignored for 10 of them. A woman named Patricia, who ran the after-school program, had come to observe at 9 and was actively helping with the trim by 11, which she had not planned and which said everything. Deputy Watts was there the whole time, technically on duty, practically just present, moving through the fairgrounds, talking to people, his hat in his hand more often than on his head. He and Mason Cole had a conversation at the edge of the building that lasted about 12 minutes and involved both of them looking at the ground for portions of it. And when it was over, they didn't shake hands, but they looked at each other with a kind of direct acknowledgement that meant something had been established. It was at 12:40 that the first complication arrived. A man named Terry Grabb pulled his pickup truck into the fairgrounds parking area and got out and stood with his arms crossed and his face arranged in the expression of someone who has decided in advance to be unhappy about something and is looking for the right target to attach that unhappiness to. Terry Grabb was not a bad man exactly. He was an afraid man who expressed his fear as anger, which in Timmy's limited but growing experience was extremely common. "This is still a public space," Terry said loudly, to no one in particular and everyone in earshot. "I don't care what repairs they're doing. I don't care what the story is. These people don't belong here, and someone should be saying that." The fairgrounds got quieter, not completely. The sawing kept going, the painting kept going, but the human sound layer dropped. Mason Cole was across the fairgrounds. He heard it. Timmy watched him turn slowly and look at Terry Grabb with a calm, measured look of someone deciding something. Then Mason looked at Lily, who was standing close by, and Lily gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet," that shake said. "Let someone else." Ruth Harper set down her empty cobbler dish and walked over to Terry Grabb. Timmy went very still. Ruth was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 63 years old, and she had never once in her life needed to raise her voice to make a point, which was its own kind of power. "Terry," she said. Terry looked at her. Some of the bluster shifted in his face, not enough to disappear, but enough to accommodate the fact that this was Ruth Harper and not an abstraction. "Ruth," he said. "My grandson found that woman chained to a tree in the creek woods," she said. "He's 8 years old, and he sat on the ground in the dark next to a woman he'd never met, and he held her hand until the deputies came." She looked at Terry steadily. "These men came here because of what he did. They came to say thank you to a child. And now they're fixing the fence that the Parks Department hasn't gotten to in 2 years and painting a building nobody's looked at properly in 10. She paused. "What exactly is it that you're objecting to, Terry?" Terry opened his mouth, closed it. "The fence," Ruth said. "The paint. The fact that someone showed up and did something when most of us have been walking past it for years." She didn't raise her voice once. "I'm genuinely asking. Tell me what the problem is, and I'll listen." Terry looked at the fence. He looked at the building. He looked at the people from town who were working alongside the riders. Patricia with her paintbrush, Carol with her thermos, a teenager named Marcus who'd started helping with the lumber because he was bored and capable and nobody told him not to. Terry's jaw worked for a moment. "It's not that," he said finally. His voice was lower now. "It's not any of that." "Then what is it?" Ruth asked. A long pause. And then something in Terry's face did what fear almost never does when it's been wearing the mask of anger. It showed itself. "I don't know who they are," he said. "I don't know what they want, and I don't know what happens when they leave." Ruth looked at him for a moment with something that was not unkind. "Neither do I," she said, "but I know what happened 2 days ago, and I know what's happening right now, and sometimes that's all you get to know." She picked up her cobbler dish and walked back to where Timmy was standing. Terry Grabb stood in the parking lot for another minute. Then he walked over to where Reese was loading scrap lumber into a truck bed and said, "You need a hand with that?" Reese looked at him. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Terry Grabb helped load lumber for 45 minutes. Timmy watched all of it. He watched it with the particular attention of a child who is storing things, not because he's been told to, but because something in him knows that what he's seeing is important in a way he doesn't fully have the language for yet. He watched the way fear moved through people and the way it could change direction. The way it had changed direction in Terry Grabb, because one woman had asked him the right question in the right tone and given him enough space to find his own answer. He was thinking about all of this when Mason Cole sat down on the bench beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Mason said, "Your grandmother is remarkable." "I know," Timmy said. "She did in about 2 minutes what I've spent 15 years not being able to do with most people." Timmy looked at him. "What's that?" "Made them less afraid of us," Mason said simply. "Not by telling them not to be afraid, by asking them what, specifically, they were afraid of." He paused. "Most people, when you make them name it exactly, realize it's smaller than they thought." Timmy considered that. "Or they find out it's real," he said. Mason looked at him sharply. "Because sometimes the fear is real," Timmy said. "The black vipers were real." A silence. Then Mason said very quietly, "Yeah, they were." "So how do people know the difference?" Timmy asked. "Between fear that's right and fear that's wrong?" Mason was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Timmy started to think he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I've been thinking about that question for about 20 years, and I don't have a complete answer. But I think part of it is, you look at what they do when nobody's watching. When there's no camera and no crowd and no reason to perform anything." He looked at the men working across the fairgrounds. "You look at what a person does when a kid is alone in the woods and needs help, and nobody's going to see, and there's no reward." He looked back at Timmy. "That's when you find out what something is made of." Timmy looked at his hands. "I wasn't trying to find anything out," he said. "I just heard her." "I know," Mason said. "That's the point." Lily came and sat on the other side of Timmy. Her ribs made her careful getting down, but she managed it, and she sat with her boot heels hooked on the bottom of the bench and her elbows on her knees and her face forward, watching the same thing they were watching. The three of them sat there, the 44-year-old man with 200 brothers and 15 years of road behind him, the woman who had spent a night chained to a tree and come out of it unbroken, and the 8-year-old boy who had been the hinge point of everything. And they sat in the specific, companionable silence of people who don't need to fill the space between them because the space between them already means something. Then Lily said, without looking at either of them, "The man who sent the text." Mason glanced past Timmy to her. "He called me this morning," she said, "from a different number. He wanted to know. He wanted to know if the boy was okay." Timmy looked at her. "He said..." She paused and her voice did something careful around the next words. "He said he saw them take me. He said he watched it happen and he didn't stop it. And he's been carrying that since it happened. He said when he heard about Timmy, he thought, if an 8-year-old kid can decide to stay, then what's my excuse for leaving?" The bench was very quiet. "So he sent the warning," Mason said. "He sent the warning," Lily confirmed. "And he walked away from 12 years of his life because of what this kid did." She looked at Timmy then, and her expression had all of its usual control, except in the places closest to the surface, where it didn't. "You started a chain reaction, Timmy Harper. You know that?" Timmy shook his head. "I just stayed," he said. "That's the chain reaction," Lily said. It was 3:15 in the afternoon when the second thing happened. The thing nobody saw coming. A car pulled up to the fairgrounds, a plain sedan, older model, out-of-county plates. A man got out who was neither a rider nor a townsperson. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, lean, with a notebook and a camera around his neck, and the particular look of someone who knew how to make themselves seem unobtrusive and mostly failed at it. A journalist. Mason saw him at the same time Watts did. Mason's expression didn't change. Watts's hand went briefly to his belt and then released. The journalist made his way toward the center of the fairgrounds with the careful confidence of someone exercising a right they know they have and are watching for any challenge to. He looked at the fence. He looked at the building. He took a photo of the riders and townspeople working together, which caught Patricia mid-stroke with her paintbrush and Reese holding the board steady for her. Then he saw Timmy. He didn't come over immediately. He was smart enough not to come over immediately. He took 2 more photos and talked to Carol Briggs first, which was, Timmy would later think, both a tactically correct choice and a mistake, because Carol Briggs was going to tell him absolutely everything and add several opinions at full volume. But then he did come over. He came over and he looked at Timmy with the look of someone who has confirmed a fact they suspected. "Are you Timmy Harper?" he asked. "Who are you?" Ruth said. She had materialized at Timmy's shoulder without him noticing, which was a thing she did with unsettling reliability. The man gave his name, James Avery, Knoxville Tribune. He said he'd heard about what happened on the police scanner and done some follow-up calls. He said he wasn't there to cause problems. He said he thought there was a story here that people should hear. "There is," Ruth said, "but my grandson is 8 years old, and you will speak to me first." Avery looked at her. He had the self-awareness to recognize he was not going to win a direct contest with Ruth Harper, so he pivoted correctly. "Ma'am," he said, "can I ask you a few questions?" "You can ask," she said. "I'll decide which ones I answer." Mason had drifted closer in the way he did, not approaching directly, just becoming present. He didn't interfere. He stood about 12 feet away with his arms loose and watched. Avery asked his questions. Ruth answered the ones she chose. She was precise and honest and gave him nothing more than what she decided was right. When he asked about the motorcycle club and the fairgrounds, she said, "I see people fixing a fence and painting a building. That's what I see." When he asked about the Black Vipers and the arrest, she said, "That's a question for Deputy Watts." When he asked about Timmy, she said, "My grandson heard a person who needed help and he helped. I raised him to do that. I hope someone raised you the same way." Avery wrote that down. Then he looked at Timmy and said, "Can I ask you just one question? Just one?" Ruth looked at Timmy. The decision was hers to make, and she made it by leaving it to him, which was its own kind of answer. "Okay," Timmy said. Avery crouched down. He was not as natural at it as Mason had been. It was a reporter's gesture, learned rather than instinctive. But he made the effort, and Timmy gave him credit for it. "When you heard her voice in the woods," Avery said, "what made you go toward it instead of away from it?" Timmy thought about it. He looked at the ground. He looked at the patch folded in his pocket. He thought about the deer with its eyes open and the man passed out against the pine. He thought about his grandmother's voice. "Some people walk past trouble, and some people can't." "I don't know how to walk past," he said. Avery wrote it down. And those 6 words, "I don't know how to walk past," would appear on the front page of the Knoxville Tribune the next morning. And from there they would be picked up. And from there they would go places that no one standing in that fairgrounds on that afternoon could have predicted or prepared for. But that was tomorrow. Today the fence was fixed. The building had its first coat of white. The dead oak across the walking path had been cut and stacked and would be dry enough for firewood by fall. Patricia had paint on her left cheek and didn't know it. Carol Briggs had gone through both thermoses and come back with a third. Terry Grabb had loaded 4 truckloads of scrap lumber and was now sitting on the tailgate of the pickup with a rider named Dennis, talking about truck engines with the ease of men who have found common ground in the specific. Mason stood in the middle of all of it and looked at it. Just looked at it for a long, quiet moment, like a man who has been building towards something for a very long time and is allowing himself exactly one moment of standing still in the middle of it before the next thing starts. Lily came and stood beside him. "Is this what you pictured?" she asked. He thought about it. "Better," he said. She looked at Timmy, who was now sitting on the edge of the newly repaired playground fence with Duke, who had arrived from nowhere in the way Duke always arrived from nowhere, pressed against his leg, watching the town move around him with those 8-year-old eyes that had seen more in 3 days than most people process in a year. "He's going to be something," Lily said. "He already is," Mason said. Across the fairgrounds, Timmy Harper sat on the fence with his dog and his patch and his photograph and the 6 words he'd said without thinking. And he didn't know yet what any of it was going to become. He didn't know about the newspaper. He didn't know about the phone calls that were already starting. People from other towns, other counties, other states who had heard the name Timmy Harper on a police scanner or a radio or through the particular modern current that carried stories faster than weather. He didn't know that James Avery was already in his car composing the first paragraph of the piece that would change everything. He knew that the fence was fixed. He knew that the building was white. He knew that the man who had sent him 4 words from a phone had walked away from his old life because he'd heard about a boy who wouldn't run. He knew that Lily Cole had gone back to the oak tree in the morning and stood there and looked at it until she felt done with it. He knew that his grandmother had asked Terry Grabb to name his fear, and Terry Grabb had loaded lumber. He sat on the fence and let Duke lean against him, and the afternoon light came down on all of it. The repaired, and the painted, and the cleared, and the changed. And Timmy Harper felt, somewhere below the level where he had words for things, the particular weight of a day that had done its work. He didn't know what came next, but he knew, with the absolute unqualified certainty of a child who has learned to trust what he knows, that whatever came next, it would not find him walking past it. The newspaper hit the stands at 6:15 the next morning, and by 7 o'clock, Ruth Harper's phone had rung 4 times. She answered the first call because she didn't recognize the number and thought it might be Deputy Watts. It wasn't. It was a woman from Chattanooga who had read the article online and was crying before she got 3 sentences out, saying something about her own grandson and about how she'd read the words, "I don't know how to walk past," and had to pull her car over to the side of the road because she couldn't see straight. Ruth listened to the whole thing. She said, "Thank you." She hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand still on the phone. Then she went and made coffee, because that was what you did. The second call was a radio station. She said no thank you and hung up before they finished the sentence. The third was James Avery himself, calling to tell her the piece had been picked up by 3 other papers and that he wanted her to know before it got bigger. She appreciated the courtesy. She told him so. The fourth call was Mason Cole. "Have you seen it?" he asked. "I've seen it," she said. "How's Timmy?" She looked through the doorway into the living room, where Timmy was still asleep on the couch, with Duke sprawled across his feet. He'd slept 12 hours straight, which was what his body had apparently needed to do after 3 of the most compressed days of his 8-year life. "He's asleep," she said. "I'm going to let him sleep as long as he sleeps." "Good," Mason said. "When he wakes up, I'd like to come by, if that's okay." "It's okay," she said. A pause. Then Mason said, "It's getting bigger than the Tribune, Mrs. Harper. I want you to be ready for that." "Define bigger," she said. Another pause. "I had 17 calls before 6 a.m., he said. 2 TV stations, 1 national outlet." He paused again. "And a call from a veterans organization in Nashville that wants to name a community service award after him." Ruth sat down. "He's 8 years old," she said. "I know," Mason said. "I'm not telling you to do any of it. I'm telling you it's coming so it doesn't land on you sideways." She appreciated that too. She was starting to understand that Mason Cole operated on a set of values that were not complicated. They were just not the values most people assumed he had when they looked at him. "Come by at 10, she said. When Timmy woke up at 9:40, Ruth handed him the newspaper before he'd had his first sip of juice. She did it without comment, which was the right way to do it, giving him the information and space to have his own reaction, rather than handing him her reaction along with it. He read it slowly. His lips moved slightly on the hard words. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at his juice glass. "He used my words," he said. "He did," Ruth said. "Is that okay?" "You said them out loud to him," she said. "You knew he was writing things down." Timmy looked at the paper again, at the headline, at his name in print. Timmy Harper, age 8, of Asheville, Tennessee. He touched the paper briefly, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. "Grammy," he said. People are going to look at me different now." It wasn't a question. Ruth looked at her grandson, at the seriousness in his face, at the 8-year-old working through something that most adults spent their whole lives avoiding the weight of, and she told him the truth. "Yes," she said, "some of them will." "I don't want to be different," he said. "I want to be the same." "You can be," she said. "What people see and what you are, those are two different things. You get to decide which one you live in." She held his gaze. "You understand me?" He did. He nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when something had gone all the way in. "Good," she said. "Now eat your eggs before Mason gets here." Mason arrived at 10 on the dot, which Timmy was starting to understand was a thing about him. He set a time, and he meant the time. Lily was with him, moving more easily than yesterday, her ribs still wrapped under her jacket, but her stride fuller, more like herself. Behind them, parked at the road, were 4 other riders. Not a crowd, not a statement, just company. They sat on the porch, Mason and Lily on one side, Timmy and Ruth on the other, Duke patrolling the perimeter with his nose 2 inches above the floorboards. The morning was warm, and the coffee was good, and for a few minutes it was just that, people sitting on a porch. Then Mason put his mug down and leaned forward. "I'm going to tell you something that happened this morning," he said. He looked at Timmy. "And I want you to hear it before you hear it from someone else." Timmy straightened slightly. "The man who sent you the text," Mason said, "his name is Carl. He left the Black Vipers 2 days ago. This morning he walked into the Maryville Police Department and gave a full statement. Everything. Names, locations, operations, everything." He paused. "He said he'd been trying to find a reason to walk away for 3 years. He said when he heard what you did, he realized the reason didn't have to be complicated." The porch was quiet. "He said if a kid could decide in 10 seconds to do the right thing," Mason continued, "then the only thing stopping him for 3 years was himself." Timmy looked at the porch boards. He was quiet for a moment. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked. "Carl?" Mason looked at him. Something moved across his face, quick and genuine. "Working on it," he said. "He's cooperating fully. The DA's office is working on it." He held Timmy's gaze. "But he wanted me to tell you something, directly." "What?" "He said to tell you, you didn't know it, but you were in those woods for more than one person." The porch held that sentence for a moment, the way certain sentences need to be held before they can be properly absorbed. Lily was looking out at the yard. Her jaw was tight in the way it got when she was managing something. Her hand rested on the arm of her chair, and her fingers pressed down once, deliberate, then released. "There's something else," she said. Everyone looked at her. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her phone. She turned it so Timmy could see the screen. It was a social media post, a photograph of the Knoxville Tribune article, shared by an account Timmy didn't recognize, with a caption he read twice. The post had been shared over 40,000 times since 6 a.m. Timmy looked at the number. He looked at Lily. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," she said carefully, "that people who have never been to Asheville, Tennessee, and will never meet you, read 6 words you said and felt something." She put the phone away. "It means what you did and what you said got out of this county and this state, and it's moving." "Why?" Timmy asked. It was honest. He genuinely didn't understand. Lily thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Because most people, when they're honest with themselves, know they would have walked past. They know it, and you didn't. And when people see someone do the thing they know they should do but don't, it reminds them of who they want to be. She paused. That's not a small thing. That's maybe the biggest thing. Ruth reached over and put her hand on Timmy's arm without a word. Timmy sat with all of it. The 40,000 shares, Carl walking into the police station, the Veterans Award Mason had mentioned on the phone, the woman from Chattanooga who'd had to pull over, all of it reaching back to one afternoon in wet sneakers in the creek woods, following a voice. I didn't do it for any of that, he said. I know, Mason said. I need people to know that. They do know, Mason said. That's exactly why it matters to them. The morning moved, and with it came the thing Mason had said was coming. At 11:30, a TV van pulled down Hadley Road, not aggressively, not unannounced, but there. Ruth stood up when she saw it and said, in her most final voice, no. And that was that. The van sat at the end of the road for 45 minutes and then left. Watts drove past twice and Ruth gave him a nod through the window and he gave one back. But the weight of the outside world pressing toward them was real, and Timmy could feel it. Not as fear, but as a kind of pressure, the way air pressure changes before weather. He sat on the porch and felt it building, and he thought about what Ruth had said that morning. What people see and what you are. Two different things. He was still thinking about it when Lily sat down beside him. Mason had gone inside to take a call, and Ruth had followed to offer more coffee because Ruth Harper fed people through all situations. And it was just the two of them on the porch with Duke. Lily sat with her elbows on her knees and looked at the road. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah, Timmy said. When I was lying against that tree the second night, right before morning, when I'd been there long enough that my mind started doing the thing where it tells you nobody's coming. She stopped, started again. I made myself a deal. I said if someone comes, I'm done making myself small. I'm done deciding what I deserve based on what other people think of what I am. She paused. You know what I mean by that? Timmy thought about it. Like, people see the vest and they decide something. She looked at him. Yeah, exactly like that. So what did you decide? I decided that if I got out of those woods, I was going to stop waiting for people to see me right and just be what I actually am. Her voice was quiet and steady. And then you came through those trees and you didn't see the vest first. You saw a person who needed help. She looked at him directly. You gave me back something I'd been letting other people take for a long time. You did that before you said a single word, just by coming. Timmy didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure there was anything to say, so he just sat there, which was what he'd done in the woods, and which still seemed to be the right thing. After a moment, Lily said, You're going to have people tell you what this means for the rest of your life. Reporters and strangers and people in your town and people who don't know you at all. They're all going to have a version of it. I know, he said. You know what it actually means? He looked at her. It means you're someone who hears a person calling and goes toward it, she said. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. Don't let anyone make it more complicated than that. He nodded. He tucked it away. He was getting a collection of things tucked away now. His grandmother's words, Mason's words, Lily's words. A kind of internal storehouse of things said by people who had come through fire and still knew what they were. He understood, without having words for the understanding, that these were things he would be returning to for a long time. The twist came at 1:15, and it came from a direction nobody had anticipated. A car pulled up to the house, not a TV van, not a police cruiser, not a motorcycle. An ordinary car, dented on one side, out-of-county plates, and from it stepped a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and sensible shoes and red eyes that said she had been crying recently and had decided to stop. Mason came off the porch first. He looked at her. His whole body changed. Catherine, he said. His voice had dropped to a register Timmy had never heard from him before. Careful, complicated, old. The woman looked at Mason. Then she looked past him, at Lily, and her face did something that had several things happening in it at once. "I heard what they did to you," she said to Lily. Her voice was tight. "I heard and I—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "Danny told me, before he turned himself in. He called me and he told me everything and he said he was going to fix it." The porch went completely still. Timmy looked at Mason. Mason's jaw was working slowly, processing something, deciding something. Lily had stood up. She was very still. "Catherine," Mason said carefully, "Danny is your son." "Yes," the woman said. Her voice cracked once on the word and then held. "He's my son, and what he was part of, what he watched happen." She stopped again. Her hands came together in front of her and pressed. "I am not here to ask for anything. I am not here to make excuses. I am here because I needed to look at the woman my son didn't protect and say, 'I'm sorry.' And I needed to look at the boy who did." She turned her eyes to Timmy, and they were red-rimmed and direct, and full of something enormous being carefully handled. "Because my son said an 8-year-old boy shamed him into being a man, and I needed to see that boy." The porch held the silence for 5 full seconds. Then Lily moved. She came down the porch steps, carefully because of the ribs, and she walked to Catherine and she stood in front of her and she looked at her for a long moment. And then she said, "Your son saved my husband's wife and a child from being in danger. He did that. Whatever else he did that too." Catherine pressed her hands to her face, just for a moment. Then she brought them down and held herself together. "He's trying to do right," she said. "He's trying." "I know," Lily said. "Mason knows." She glanced back at Mason, who gave a single, slight nod. "What happens from here, that's not mine to control. But I want you to hear this from me, directly. Your son's choice mattered. It protected people. That's real." Catherine looked at her. Her chin trembled once. "Thank you," she said. Lily nodded. She stepped back. She didn't reach out. There was too much unresolved between the larger history of what their families meant to each other. But the space between them was not hostile. It was the space of two people who have found one true thing they can stand on together, even when the ground around it is complicated. Catherine turned to Timmy. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. He looked back at her. "You're Timmy Harper," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Danny said—" She stopped, collected herself. "He said he heard you stayed with her, even after she told you to go." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" she asked. Not the way a reporter asked, the way a mother asks, searching for something real, something she can bring back and put in the hands of her son who is sitting in a police station 30 miles away, trying to rebuild himself from the foundation up. Timmy thought about it carefully, the way he always did. "Because leaving would have been the wrong thing," he said, "and I already knew how to stay." Catherine looked at him for another long moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out. He looked at Ruth, who gave him a small nod. He took it. He unfolded it. It was a letter, handwritten in the looping, pressured handwriting of someone who does not write letters often. It was from Danny. It was short, 11 lines. Timmy read it slowly. When he finished, he read the last 2 lines again. "I don't know you, but you changed the direction of my life. I think you should know that. You should know that what you did mattered further than you can see." He folded the letter carefully. He put it in his shirt pocket, next to the photograph of the tree. "Tell him I said thank you," Timmy said to Catherine. She nodded. She thanked Ruth. She thanked Mason, who shook her hand with the gravity of a man meeting someone from the other side of a long war, and finding they are, underneath all of it, just a person. Then she got back in her car and she drove away. The porch let out a collective breath. Mason sat back down. He looked at Timmy. He looked at the shirt pocket where the letter was folded. He looked at Ruth. "Does he understand?" Mason said quietly to Ruth. what kind of person he is. Ruth looked at her grandson with the full, unhurried attention of 63 years and a grandmother's particular knowledge of a child's specific soul. "Not yet," she said, "but he will." The afternoon came down slow and warm. The riders gathered at the fairgrounds one last time, not for work, the work was done, but to leave together, the way they had arrived. 500 of them, idling in formation, the sound of it moving through Asheville like a tide that was now going back out. Timmy stood at the edge of the fairgrounds with his grandmother and watched them. Mason stopped beside him one last time. He crouched down. He looked at the boy who had started all of this with nothing but a half-empty water bottle and a refusal to walk away. And he put one hand briefly on Timmy's shoulder. "You got questions," he said, "about any of this, any of it, you call that number. Anytime. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." "And Timmy," he waited until the boy was fully looking at him, "when you're grown and you're going to grow up into someone worth watching, remember this week. Not the newspaper, not the patch, not the 40,000 shares." His voice was low and absolutely direct. "Remember the creek. Remember what it felt like to hear someone calling and go toward it. Keep that. Don't ever let the world talk you out of that." Timmy held his gaze. "I won't," he said. Mason stood. He walked to his motorcycle. He started it. And the sound of 500 engines rose together in the afternoon and moved through the town and through the people standing at their fences and their storefronts watching. And then they were moving. Down the road, out of town, taking with them the particular gravity of everything they had brought and left behind. Lily was the last one. She paused beside Timmy. She looked at him one more time with those two eyes, one still healing, one steady, and she didn't say anything. She just pressed two fingers briefly to her temple, a small salute, precise and true. Then she rode. The sound faded. The road was quiet. Asheville settled back into itself, but differently. The way a place settles after something real has moved through it and left the air changed. Ruth put her hand on Timmy's shoulder. He had the patch in one pocket and the photograph in another, and the letter in his shirt pocket over his heart. And Duke was pressing against his right leg, and the fence at the fairgrounds was fixed, and the building was white, and somewhere 30 miles away a man named Carl and a man named Danny were both sitting in the wreckage of their old lives, trying to build something true, because a boy in wet sneakers had heard a voice and gone toward it. Timmy Harper stood in the quiet of the road and felt all of it settle, the weight and the meaning and the particular irreversible gravity of 3 days that had changed the shape of everything around him. He was 8 years old. He didn't know how to walk past, and that, it turned out, was enough to change the world.